I have the great pleasure to introduce Elouise Epstein to you. And she is not one, she is the tech expert when it comes to procurement. It's a little bit like transferring owls to Athens, and probably I love to see Elouise. Thank you very much for joining us, and it's a pleasure to having you here with us. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we would love to hear more about what the future of procurement is, and probably maybe you will show us, or let's say give us some insights of this great book. And please, let's say, stay tuned, because now comes the best part of the show. So Elouise, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here. I am coming to you from actually Las Vegas, so it's a beautiful day here, or it will be when we all wake up. I want to take you back. Speaking of Las Vegas, I want to take you back to March of 2021 and to a Walmart pharmacy outside of Las Vegas here, where I got my vaccine, my COVID-19 vaccine. And if you recall, the first shots, you would have to wait 15 minutes to see if there was any side effects. And after I got my shots, I did not experience any immediate side effects. However, I did experience an existential crisis, because I was staring at this piece of paper, my vaccination record card. And so my entire short-term, midterm, and maybe even partially long-term health outlook was dependent on a piece of paper. And for 15 minutes, I just stared at this piece of paper and thought, is this the best that the American healthcare system can come up with? I have my credit card, my passport, my transit cards, all on my phone. And I have to keep this card safe for 4 weeks before I could get the next vaccine, and then take the data off this card and share it with the government, with my employer, with my insurance company, with my healthcare provider. And I just could not wrap my head around this. This just seems so utterly silly in 2021. And so I went home and I scribbled down what I thought the vaccine supply chain was. And so this is what it looked like. I just put it into PowerPoint, but essentially this is what it looked like. Is we had source material. I knew it went to some manufacturing place. It was manufactured by batches. There were serial numbers. I know the serial numbers because they were on my card. And then from the manufacturing plant, it went to some sort of distribution plant, and it went by air, sea, land. I don't even know. And then it went to the Walmart distribution network. And then from there, it went to the regional distribution centers. And then it went from there to the individual stores, where I went to one of the stores and I got my injection. And I started to look at this and think, oh my God, is this what a 21st century supply chain looks like? Do you know how many handoffs there are from that source material all the way through to where that vaccine got injected into my arm? And I put in a vaccine into my body that I had no idea what the provenance was. And it got me to thinking that why is that the issue? And why do I not know this information? And more importantly, why do I have to take this information and manually input it into all these different systems? And then I realized that the underlying problem here is that all of these different entities that touch my vaccine and the data afterwards in the healthcare profession, none of these systems are integrated. And they're very unlikely to be integrated because there's no incentive to integrate them. And that's when I realized that the entirety of supply chain design and operations is broken. And that is the essence of the book. My most recent book was to deconstruct this and talk about what we have to do to get better at this. Because if we're going to design the next generation supply chain, we have to really get good at solving this exact problem here. And what I love is what we have here is all these different third parties, and they need to exchange data. And who is good at exchanging or managing third parties and exchanging data with third parties? Procurement. That is our job. That is our remit. That is the future. And so if we're going to build the next generation supply chain, we have to build it. We are going to be at the center of it. Procurement, or people that understand third party management and third party data exchange, which is pretty much what we do in procurement. We are going to build the next generation supply chain, that because we are going to have to move beyond the four walls. Just because the vaccine said Moderna on it doesn't mean that there weren't a lot of different entities touching that vaccine before it got into my body. And so we have to think beyond the four walls. This is no longer a single plant or a single set of plants or factories in a particular region. Supply chains and production are globalized. We have to be better at building relationships between these third parties to get everybody to cooperate in data exchange. I think it's pretty obvious by now that the world is almost literally on fire. I live in California, and oftentimes California is on fire. So we really have to get our hands on climate change and the sustainability aspect of this. We can no longer treat the environmental aspect of this as an afterthought, and I have this anecdote in the book. In Ohio, in the state of Ohio, back in the 70s, there were so many chemicals in the water that the water caught on fire, and they could not put the fire out in the water. So we have moved a long way from that, but we have to really go further. And then obviously we are in the age of AI. So digital proficiency and technological competencies, that's not the future, that's the right here and now. And so I'm going to talk about all of these themes and get into them a little bit to hopefully bring them to light a little bit. All right, so let's talk about the big fraud. The big fraud is digital transformations or supply chain digital transformations. It's actually true for other functions in the enterprise, but I don't care about those. I care about supply chain and procurement. And 84% of digital transformations fail. And I would actually put that number closer to 100% or 99%. Most of them fail. And it's because for these three reasons. And it's because we put the complexity on the end users. And I'll bring that to light here in a very funny way in a moment. Most digital transformations are just ERP upgrades in disguise. And that's driven by the CIO and the IT organization. And in my first book, I was very conciliatory or kind to CIOs. In my new book, I basically lay them out and take them to task, or I humiliate CIOs because they're holding the supply chain profession back. And just buying the next ERP into upgrade, that's not going to do it. We have to move beyond the ERP, because guess what the ERP is not designed for? It is not designed for collaboration outside the four walls. And so that's why ERPs are the wrong system. And I go to great lengths to point that out. And of course, the people are underserved. That means the talent. And the previous speaker was talking about this too. If you are not upskilling yourself right now, you are in trouble. And I will close this session with a bit about AI and sort of its impact on the people. Actually, I'll talk about that a few times, but like, you should leave this presentation and just go home, skip drinks, just go home and start learning AI, because that's how dramatic this is going to be. All right, so let's talk about complexity at the wrong place. So if I show you a Apple product, it's something you touch, and we all know what to do. We can figure it out. A 2-year-old, a 3-year-old can figure this out. I've even seen cats figure out iPads. So there's a lot of interesting things on TikTok these days. But if I show you a Google product, it's a text box and you click a button and something magical happens. But if I show you an enterprise app, it looks something like this. And some of you may have seen this. This was a meme that went around a couple of years ago. And I just thought this is so great because this is exactly why digital transformations fail. Because Google and Apple spend a lot of time and money with engineers to reduce the complexity for the end user so that all you have to do is touch something. And the IT organization does the same thing to make their lives simpler, but our end users painful. And just to bring this to light, this is Kearney's implementation of SAP. And this, if you're confused at what you're looking at, you're not alone. I don't even know how to use this tool. I do nothing but study digital tools and systems all day, every day of the week, every day of the year. I can't figure this tool out. I have to have my executive assistant to input anything that goes into this. It's too complicated. And by the way, this is technology that was built in the 1990s. Literally, like if you look at the code that comes up, it's bringing up technology that was at the turn of the 21st century. That's how old this stuff is. And yet you will spend billions of euros or millions, hundreds of millions of euros to put in a quote unquote ERP system, or in this case, SAP. So we have to move beyond this idea that this one legacy system will do it. Doesn't mean you rip it out. It just means we have to be really mindful about what we're doing. And so to do that, we have to upskill our talent because we cannot just rely on the business as usual. And so what we do today is we have a lot of folks doing buying. We have category experts, we have supplier managers, we have all of this very transactional activity. And this can include approving POs, it can include running sourcing events. And in worst case, it can involve cutting and pasting data from one system to another, which just irritates me to no end. But tomorrow's procurement is none of that. It's all the things I've been talking about up to this point. It's how do we work with our suppliers to integrate with one another? How do with our systems? How do we get deeper levels of connection? How do we reduce the number of suppliers in our systems? Because guess what? If you have more than 1,000 suppliers in your core systems, you are at extreme risk for getting compromised, for compromising your core systems. And so I have clients with 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 100,000 suppliers, they are not they're not managing security effectively because they have thousands upon thousands of suppliers that they're not managing. And so procurement of tomorrow is looking at problems like that and deciding how to engineer and remove those suppliers. And there's multiple ways, so it's not just one way, but get those suppliers out of your systems. And that's the type of work that we need to do. It is not it's not create a category strategy. It's not run a sourcing event. It's not look at your spend visibility. Take all that stuff and throw it out the window because it's already automated. So the question is, what are we doing and what is the work that we have to do? And so the problem, of course, is that the trainings that we have are all this gray and purple stuff. And the gray boxes are capabilities that we have been trained. They're really yesterday's skills. And that's what we've been trained on. And if you buy a procurement academy, I'll talk about those in a second, that's what these skills are. And you could argue that the purple boxes are more or less today's skills, but I would say increasingly they're yesterday's skills. And the problem with this whole slide, if you look at change management or category management plan or category or relationship management or supplier development, all of these things here are getting automated. They're already well on their way, if not completely automated. And if you look at category strategies, there's tools where you just click a button and you get the whole category strategy. You don't need any tacit knowledge. And some tools are then plugging into data, external data, internal data, to keep that category strategy up to date at all times, not just once a year. And oh, by the way, the next step is to automate actions taken in and around that category. So in other words, all of these skills, they go out the window. They're not relevant anymore. The skills that we need to be working on are these. And these are much softer skills. You cannot learn these from a learning management system. These are things like the love of data, an intellectual curiosity. If I could give you access to any data set in the world, what would it be? Without any constraints, what would you want to know? And these are the kinds of questions that we want to test for, or you should be able to answer. Maybe you would want to go to a particular library, maybe the Athens Library, and pull all the data out, and what would you learn? And so that's where the curiosity comes in. We have to remember that we are part of the business. We are not a order taker. We are not subservient to the business. We are part of the business. But if we are part of the business, we have to think about the actions that we take and how they are relevant to the business. Because sometimes just finding the lowest price supplier does nothing if the quality is terrible or it's just the supplier is awful to work with. And so we have to put ourselves in the shoes of those that are consuming whatever it is we're buying. And then, of course, I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can start to see that we have to cultivate and curate different skills, and we have to be better at storytelling, and we have to be better at different modalities of writing. And more importantly, if you take nothing else away from the slide, we have to get good at visual literacy. There's a reason I use that meme, because you will probably remember that meme, and it's because we are becoming a visual-based or a visually literate global society. That's why TikTok is so popular. That's why YouTube, Instagram, we have become acculturated to visual media. So how do you learn these skills? Well, I can tell you how you don't learn these skills. You do not learn them from a learning management system. If you have a learning management system, you can very politely tell whoever's providing it to you that you're canceling your subscription. You can just turn it off, throw it out the window, because humans do not learn from learning management systems. There's quantifiable evidence everywhere, and I go into great depth in my book on how humans learn, but it's not through this system. But the evidence that this doesn't work is that every single enterprise employee uses a learning management system to take an annual cybersecurity quote unquote training. We'll call it in quotes. And yet, despite that, somehow we continue to click on the ransomware and lock our computers. And this is an epidemic problem. And so the question is, so clearly learning cybersecurity from these tools is not the answer. And so you really just cannot learn what you need to protect yourself from a learning management system. Let me rephrase that. I can teach you everything you need to know about cybersecurity or phishing by asking you one question. And the question is how would you phish me? How would you get me to click on a link to install ransomware on my computer? And by the way, feel free to try this. And I encourage people to do it. Somebody actually did get me. They appealed to my ego. So anyway, take that for what you will. But what would you do? You would actually search the internet for me, find out as much information about me. You'd find out that that I live in the Bay Area, I drive an electric car, I'm vegan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so sending me an email for, or a phishing email for steak or meat certainly is not going to get my attention. But if you sent me a link to Toyota's newest hydrogen or electric car or whatever, you might get me. Or as I said, something that flatters my ego, you might get me. And so just by doing that, you start to visualize and imagine the process of phishing someone, and it becomes a much more tangible way of learning. And so we have to move to this other way of being and of learning. Okay, so to do that, we need to create a culture of digital. And I'm not going to go through this. This is taken from the book. You're welcome to have these slides. But the real question from this is, how do we motivate our employees to do this? And what I've been talking about is very threatening. And so the way I frame this is, there's a bus going to the future, and everybody gets a ticket to get on the bus. But some people will not get on the bus, and some people will get on the bus, and then halfway through the journey, they'll get off the bus. And so this is where we need to make people get comfortable with the idea that the bus is going to the future, whether you're on it or not. So this is not a come in and fire everybody. It's just, hey, we got to help people to get on the bus or to stay on the bus. But it's going to happen. And so how do we adjust our culture? How do we change who we hire? And how do we change and create this culture of experimentation? All right, I'm going to close out here with two quick topics, because I see we're getting close to time. I'm going to talk about ESG and AI. So ESG, I want you to take this away, that we are only in phase 0 of this journey. So everything that you hear about assessment, certification, carbon cubes, on and on and on, everything that people are selling to you today or you are building today is phase 0. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying that it's in phase 0. We are not making the tangible efforts we think we are, despite what you read on LinkedIn. Phase 1 is where we start to map the value chains and really start to get better at understanding what is happening with our third parties. And this gets back to that vaccine example at the beginning. Just like I mapped the vaccine, we need to map not only the carbon, but the waste and the environmental impact of our end-to-end supply chains. We are years away from that. We should start now. We absolutely should start now. But right now, the hype is outpacing what people are doing. And I know that because we can't even exchange basic data amongst all these third parties. And so that's why that's where we're at now. And then we need to phase 2 is really expanding and this reforestation idea, the regeneration idea, et cetera, et cetera. And phase 3, we are going to create. We can't talk about phase 3, because if we don't do phase 2, we're not really going to be able to do phase 3. So just keep this in mind when we talk about the ESG effort. And I'll just make a couple quick points here. Every assessment you send out is futile, or most of them are, because the question you're asking is not what the supplier is understanding. Even if they want to answer in their own, even if they want to answer in their, they want to be honest, even if that's true, that doesn't mean they understand what you're asking. So here's an example. Here's an RFP question. Do you measure your greenhouse gases? This is real, by the way. And the response was, we don't have any greenhouses. We're not in the agriculture business. And this, to me, typifies the problem of assessments. The question you're asking is not what the supplier's understanding. And even so, if you're asking thousands upon thousands of suppliers, are you really looking at and understanding what they're responding? Because they might do their best effort and might not be good enough. Just a couple of other points here. I spent last summer evaluating 256 ESG tools. I was only out of that 256, only 8 were particularly interesting. So there's a lot of hype, a lot of garbage out there. And then to bring this back to digital, and I'll just use palm oil as an example. Palm oil is bad. I think we all know that, and it's produced predominantly in 2 countries, in Indonesia and Malaysia. Now, when we apply digital tools to this, we can start to see something different. Now, we can talk about this till we're blue in the face, but we now have satellite images. Everybody has access to satellite images, and we can see this image from 2018, and we can see this image from 2019, and you can see the amount of deforestation in the palm oil fields. And the reason this is important is because as citizen data scientists, we have access to this in ways we've never had before. So back to that slide about talent and thinking about what we do, it's what's the data set that we could have? What would we do with that data, and how would we use it? And this is just a small example of how we would do that. All right, I'm going to close out here with AI. If you're over 30, I don't care what you have to say about Gen AI, and that's true. You shouldn't listen to me. You shouldn't listen to anybody over 30. And it's not because we don't know what we're talking about. It's because we're biased by the way things have been or will be. And so, just to prove that point, if you read LinkedIn, all of the analysts and consultants and pundits, they say that Gen AI will solve all of these things here: manufacturing, efficiency, hiring, procurement, safety, et cetera, et cetera. And this is probably technically true, but you know what the problem is? The problem is there's 2 problems. One, this is so high level that it's useless. But the second thing is this is 10 years ago. This is what everybody said big data would do. And maybe some of you are not even old enough to know what big data is. I'm still not even sure we ever defined what big data is, but it didn't solve these things. And so to just say that Gen AI will do it is overhyping the problem. So let me give you one example of where Gen AI is actually doing this. And so this is a typical requisition process. And if it looks complicated, that's because it is, because we have lots of internal systems. They're handing off from SAP to Salesforce to Excel in there and whatever else. Doesn't matter what tools they are, but this is why the business hates procurement, because we put in things like this that make it super complicated. And what I would like to suggest to you is that this is the old way of designing and deploying digital systems. Because think about Netflix or any on-demand streaming service or any modern consumer technology. You don't actually set a hard-coded workflow. That's what this is. It's a workflow. Some consultants they designed it, and then they hard-coded it into SAP or whatever system. And that way means that you are locked into that process and that system for pretty much ever, until you rip that system out. But Netflix and these these other newer tools, they don't hard code any process into anything. They're intelligent systems. They start with they set a starting point, an end point, and constraints. And what the system and the user do is it doesn't matter. As long as these constraints are in place, then that's all that's there. And so I would argue that this is what we have to do in procurement. And so I have an example of this. I took that same requisition example, and I'm just going to read you the script because this is hard to read, but I'm just going to bring this to life. And so Tom wants to requisition a new laptop, and the source bot, the automated bot, says, "What brand do you want?" Most users select Apple or Lenovo. And so in this interaction, we've just had one exchange. The system is already nudging Tom to the outcome we want. We could also put the constraint in that says the users can only select Apple or Lenovo, and Tom wouldn't be any the wiser, because Tom just wants a laptop. And so then Tom says, well, what models do we have? And the source bot brings back the 4 models that, of course, are what? They're pre-approved. So here, and Tom doesn't care if they're pre-approved. Tom doesn't care about any of that. He just wants a laptop. And so this transaction, just these two interactions, took less than 10 seconds. Now compare that to this slide. In this slide, I have to go search and figure out what I want. And if I can't find what I want, I have to kick off a procurement request, and on and on and on and on. So, but Tom, like any good user, all of a sudden says, oh, wait, can I get an iPad? And so the whole dynamic changes. And then the exchange goes and he selects an iPad, and then the bot says, hey, would you like a keyboard and a pencil with that? Because most users select that. And he says, yes, and on and on and on. And this, again, that switching in the today's systems, you'd have to go back and do a new search for an iPad. And that's what we mean by putting in intelligent systems. And this is what we need to be designing for. And while this is a simple example of a laptop, we could do it for services. We could do it for direct materials, on and on and on. And you can see some of the companies that are building this. This is not theoretical anymore. Back in, I actually created this during the lockdown in 2020. And now we are building this with companies like the ones you see on your screen. So the last thing I would just leave you with is I have to sort of bring this to life. I have back to this idea of visual literacy. I am recording my journey in learning Gen AI. So I'm a Gen Xer, so you can use that for your phishing attempts. And I am recording myself learning all the different aspects of this, and I'm just starting with no knowledge. And I say that I make myself look like an idiot, so you don't have to. And I put that out there so that people can see that, like, I'm not talking about hype. I don't care about hype. I want you to see me doing this, even if it's basic things. And I try to release an episode a week. So if you want to learn more about my journey, feel free to follow me there. All right, that's it. I think I went a few minutes over, but hopefully that was helpful, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So thank you very much, Elouise. I have got 10 million questions to you, but hopefully we can chit chat a little bit in the next conference. But I'm pretty sure we have got many questions in the audience as well. And as we have, let's say, a carrot on the sticks, the first 3 questions will win one of Dr. Elouise's books. So any shoot-ups for any immediate questions? Yes, please. Susanna, do we have a mic?
Thank you. It's very, very inspiring. You said if I'm not under 30, you don't care about what I say on AI. No, can you please say a little bit more? Because I'm definitely under 30 times 2. And I have a lot of thoughts about AI, but what would be your take, beside the fact that it's not the hype and it's not a long list of things, but what would be the take on really where it should go and where should we look at?
Well, so the reason, and by the way, I just want to clarify on that quote, the reason I say that is because we're biased. We've grown up with the world a certain way. We've grown up with understanding business in a very particular way. Many of us have lived through globalization from the early 2000s. So we have that as our point of reference. And some of us remember encyclopedias. Some of us remember dial-up internet. Some of us remember CD-ROMs. But imagine that you're 16 and you have nothing but time on your hands, and you have access to the most powerful generative tools where you can create a code, you can create a video, you can create any amount of image or video, or actually code a program. There are now AIs that will, there are AIs that will now do the design, the coding, the testing, and the deployment of software packages. And so, like, imagine that you have AI that can that can write a script, that can create the imagery, that can cut it and put us music underneath and do a movie. Like that's just completely mind-blowing. And like, that's not how we operate. We think, okay, wait, let's get together. So anyway, that's why this is so fundamentally different. And back to my point about supply chains, we have to think like that. Like, what if we could build the supply chains from scratch, not just build on what's all this legacy
around? Anything new? Okay. All right, so we have the first winner. So thank you very much for the question, Jamano. So thank you. So you see, it's that easy. Yeah? You just raise one question and you get one great book for free. So any other questions from the online audience or from the face-to-face audience here? Hey, come on, what's up?
Stunned silence.
Right?
But actually, everybody's
So then
learning. They're learning AI right now.
So then, Elouise, maybe I take the chance without taking the book. You were talking about the vaccine supply chain, which is quite interesting. And I would not say, I would just put in another buzzword. But as far as I know, there was a kind of a blockchain system which has been installed by the US government, from really the producers of the vaccine to the pharmacies, to the end user, to all the agencies, so that you can really track and trace these kind of things. But probably, as you know, blockchain is always, let's say, going up, is hyped, and it's going down. So at least this was something, I think, called kind of Operation Warp Speed. So it was a little bit like being on Star Trek, and then you got data integrity and data transparency end to end. And maybe with the help of AI, we can even enable these kind of things if we go to more digital or Web3 applications.
So, okay. I'm not a fan of blockchain, and I think it's the right concept. I think it will come eventually. I think it will come in a decade. And the reason that I think it's so problematic is because, and I have an anecdote in my book called The Tony Soprano Problem, for those that watch the HBO show The Sopranos. Is blockchain is a virtual technology. So unless you can embed it in a physical device, either a sensor or a physical product like a medical device, then it's really hard to know what happened. So think about fish or commodities or textiles. You have a lot of raw materials being pulled from the ground. You have them processed. You have them then manufactured. Until that thing becomes manufactured, blockchain, really, you lose all provenance up to that point. And the point I make with Tony Soprano is Tony's guys can interject themselves at any point until you get the finished good out for its way. So, and then the other problem that I have with blockchain is that it's a really hard technology to learn. It's too complicated. And so if you think about all the suppliers in the vaccine supply chain, they even struggle to keep up with it. And that's like big companies like Moderna and Walmart. But like we're still a decade away on that technology moving forward. I do think the Web 3.0 construct, we have to move to that, because I believe that and this is my personal opinion here, but I believe our data is a human right. And I think increasingly when we start to see our data as a human right, then companies, at least here in the United States, won't be mining my data and profiting off of it. And I think that will change. I also think this is true for suppliers. Suppliers should own their data too. And so that these big tech companies should not be using our data without our permission or without our benefit. And so as we start to own our data will live in a digital wallet that we can then choose to share. And that I do believe will be Web 3.0 technology, which was what you were alluding to. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And probably it will be even a bigger issue in the European Union rather in the US to protect private. For sure. Yeah. So last chance to win a book. Yes. Come on, do we have a micro for this nice gentleman?
Hi, Elouise. It's not only for the book, just to be honest. It is clearly understood that you have seen the history of technology evolution and how the procurement lies on this. And you have seen SAP and some workflows being there. And then, the source to contract or procure to pay suites. And then the niche products about procurement, we have seen examples about ESG. And I'm wondering, now that we have the generative AI implementation, it is early, but we have seen some steps. How do you envisage this in the procurement world? So you see something like we'll have all of them again, SAP, procure-to-pay suites, and Gen AI, or the Gen AI will somehow substitute all the other stuff?
It'll be Gen AI will completely obliterate all those other tools. So, and you don't have to get rid of them. What you're going to do is right now, you have this much SAP or Coupa or whatever, you're going to shrink it, and you're going to do this, and then you're going to put it in the closet. So it's still there. You'll run your transactions, do whatever. But over time, we're going to move away from those systems. And that's everything from source to contract to procure to pay, all of it. And think about that chatbot example I showed you. Now that chatbot is going to the requisition system, to the SAP catalog, it's going to the contract repository, pulling all that data. But over time, you'll find that why do I even need a CLM anymore? It's a pointless. Like, just give me a SharePoint folder or a Dropbox or whatever repository. Put all the contracts in there, and the Gen AI will figure that all out. It will go through and pull out all the insights. Humans don't even need to be involved in that. That's the piece that's so shocking. And the reason I showed you my Gen Xer versus Gen AI is I'll have examples. Like the video I'm going to release next week is me doing that with just a couple of random contracts, just to show how easy this is. And if I can figure it out with, like 10 minutes or 20 minutes in Gen AI, that means the entire market is going to collapse. The procure tech market is going to collapse, especially the big providers. Because why would you pay for iCertis if I can just put in Gen AI in the corporate environment with all the security, blah, blah, blah. But if I can just do it there, I don't need a tool anymore. And so when I talk about the major shift, that's going to happen. That's happening. And so your point, the second, your second option is Gen AI will completely obliterate most of these technologies that we have come to know.
All right. So thank you very much. So Elouise, a big thank you, and thank you for, let's say, being with us. Greetings to Vegas, and let's say, hope to catch up with you soon somewhere in Europe or maybe on some other stages. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a great evening. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you.